Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Spark podcast. My name is Jack, I'll be your host, and today we're going to talk about the cat telephone. This isn't something that I've went looking for specifically. This is something that I came across on Twitter, and that's not where I usually look for information at all, really. Sometimes you get a lot of political information from Twitter, but it's usually bullshit and garbage. But this was something very, very strange that I came across. I think it was QI that tweeted it out. It was a study done by two people at Princeton where they turned a living cat into a telephone. Yeah, it's as weird as it sounds, and we're just gonna get right into it, I suppose. What they linked to was a post written by April C. Armstrong in April 2017, which I thought was kind of ironic that April posted something in April. But I suppose if your name is a month, you can't really be inactive for a month to avoid irony. But anyway, it was... this is where the madness starts. It was an experiment conducted in 1929 by Professor Ernest Glenn Weaver and his assistant Charles William Bray at Princeton University. What they did was they took an unconscious but alive cat and transformed it into a working telephone to test how sound is perceived by the auditory nerve. So they were literally looking for something, which is good. It's where you start when you're doing science, is you have a question to answer. So they started off by sedating the cat and opening its skull so they could better access the auditory nerve. They then attached a telephone wire to this nerve, and the other end was attached to a telephone receiver. The assistant Bray would speak into the cat's ears while Weaver would listen through a receiver 50 feet away in a soundproof room. That sounds fucking insane to me. But, you know, it worked. He could hear the sounds that Bray was speaking into the cat's ears. And I don't know why that works, but it works. It's just nuts. The hypothesis they were testing was, is the frequency of the response of a sensory nerve correlated to the activity of the stimulus. So basically for the auditory nerve, they were looking to see if louder sounds resulted in a higher pitch or higher frequency or pitch when the sound was received by the ear, which, you know, it's something to think about, and this is something that I thought was weird, but like it was necessary, I guess, and I'm going to get into that later. It's just one of those fucking things where I can imagine these two guys are sitting down at the start of their day and they don't know what to do. They're sitting down having their coffee or whatever, and Ernie turns to Charlie and says, "What are we going to do today?" And Charlie says, I don't know. How about we turn a cat into a telephone and just see how it works? And Ernie says, "Sure, why not? I'm not doing anything else today. Let's go for it. See what happens." And it fucking worked. This is a real life example of the quote from Adam Savage of, there's no difference between science, or the only difference between science and fucking around is when you're doing science, you write stuff down. It's crazy. But they did prove their hypothesis. When Bray made a sound into the cat's ears, a sound of the same frequency was heard at the receiver. As the pitch of the ingoing sound was increased, the pitch of the sound at the receiver also increased. So they proved that you can turn a cat into a literal working telephone. from this, Bray and Weaver came to the conclusion that the frequency of the response in the auditory nerve correlated to the frequency of the sound, which let them know that stimulus on a nerve affects the outcome or the output of that nerve. To validate this, they introduced a few variables. I don't know how the cat felt about this being turned into a telephone. It can't tell us, unless somehow they get it to speak, but I don't think they could. I don't think they tried. I hope they didn't. But I didn't look into that. I didn't actually look into seeing if the cat was harmed at all during this experiment. I mean, obviously it was. They cut its skull open and fucked around with its nerves. But it didn't say if the cat died or lived as a result of it. I hope it lived. There was a lot of kickback from animal rights activists, but we'll continue on without knowing. To validate their experiment, they introduced a few variables. When they placed the wire on other tissues and nerves, the telephone receiver didn't produce any sound. So when you give a sound stimulus to another nerve and run the wire through that, it doesn't work. It only works with the auditory nerve. There's something special about the makeup of it that it translates sound like effectively. Other nerves don't do that. It's weird. What they also did was they restricted the blood flow to the cat's head, and this also ceased the transmission of sound from the receiver. So when there's no blood flow, it also stops, which makes me think that the nerves require blood to work, I guess. But I'm not a scientist. So Weaver and Bray are, and they were awarded the first Howard Crosby Warner Medal of Society by the Society of Experimental Psychologists in 1936. Now, when I saw that, I was like, why the fuck are they getting an award for opening a cat up and just fucking around with it and making it a telephone? But there's actually a lot of data and techniques that people learned from this. From this, the techniques they developed, they were highly renowned by... Sorry, I'm going to start that again because I'm fucking up. The techniques they developed for this experiment were highly renowned by physicians who used them to study hearings in humans. I imagine that the auditory nerve in a cat is very similar, if not almost identical, to this auditory nerve in a human. So they use the techniques from this to test people's hearing and see if stimulus on the auditory nerve can affect people's hearing. And they found out it did. What they did they did lots of experiments, I assume, and this led to the development of a cochlear implant. Now, being a biomedical engineer, this kind of triggered my oh shit my oh shit reaction. A cochlear implant is a medical device. It is a surgical implant which is attached directly to your auditory nerve. You can see them on anyone really. They're done on children to people who are 80 plus. It's a kind of a small device. You'll see one bit of it goes onto the ear, and there's another bit on the skull, slightly above the ear, and back a bit. It goes directly into the skull. The bit on the ear is the processor, and the bit that goes into the skull is called the electrode. And these came about because of this experiment. Because some guys were fucking around with a cat, turning it into a telephone, we got a beautiful biomedical device. But a lot of people don't know how they work, so we're going to talk about that now. But just remember, this came about because of people fucking around with a cat. It's fucked. Sometimes science does things that I don't understand why. Just like, yeah, like I said, they're probably just sitting around in the morning, didn't know what to do, and they had a cat, and they were like, we're going to turn it into a telephone and write stuff down, and then it just worked. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Basically, I looked into how we hear, and if you want to find out yourself, there's a beautiful website called dangerousdecibels.org that I don't think it specifically deals with the what am I trying to say? I don't think it specifically deals with teaching you how we hear, but it does give you some beautiful diagrams of the inner workings of the ear, which I will now explain. Our ears can sense sound waves. We do this because sound waves are physical things. If, like, for example, echoes, they literally bounce off of other physical surfaces. Like in this room, which isn't soundproofed, I'm going to clap now, and you might be able to hear the echo. That spiked the fuck out of my microphone, so maybe no one heard anything there. But in my ears, anyway, I could hear the sound travel from my hand, hit the wall across from me, and then reverberate back to me. That's because sound is a physical thing that we can measure. We measure it in decibels, and it travels. So, sound waves travel through the ear canal until they reach the eardrum. The eardrum then vibrates through the middle ear bones. These are three very, very small bones. I think it's the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, I believe. They're the smallest bones in the human body, but they translate sound almost perfectly. Well, they're calibrated to your hearing, I guess. So I don't know if it's perfect or efficient or whatever, but it works. The vibrations go through to the inner ear, called the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, there are thousands of tiny hair cells that turn these vibrations into electrical signals. These signals are then sent to the brain through the auditory nerve, and the brain tells you what you're hearing. It's amazing hearing, really. There's I'm going to go off topic a small bit here because I really like why we have two ears. They're spaced apart, and our brain is like, it goes in. I'm going to go into a bit of maths here, but our brain does trigonometry instantaneously. The reason we have two ears is so that we can tell where sounds are coming from. They're spaced apart so we can, say if a sound happens to my right, the sound will hit my right ear before it hits my left ear. Sound travels very quickly, and I've got a big head, but it's not that big that it would make a very big difference between the time it hits the right ear and the left ear. It's very small, but the human brain is fast enough to figure out which one it hit first and what direction the sound is coming from. So if it hits my right ear first, the sound's coming from the right, and if it hits my left ear first, the sound's coming from the left. That's very intuitive. If you just stop and think about it, it's pretty obvious, really. But the problem we have with that is it's only horizontal. But we can also figure out where sounds are coming from a vertical axis, if they're coming from above or below us. How does that work, really? It works by the shape of our ears. Ears are weird. They're really weird, and everyone's ear is slightly different. So when we're young, our brain interprets the reverberations around our ears, those little kind of ridges and bumps, not the actual inner ear itself, but the fleshy bit on the outside. Those ridges and bumps are all there for a reason. The way sound moves, it bounces off each one of these, like it bounced off the wall earlier when I clapped, and it directs it into the ear. And from where it bounces off around the ridges of the ear, you can tell if a sound is coming from above or below you. I can't remember what the name of the video was, but Destin from Smarter Every Day on YouTube, he did a little experiment with his son that proved this. Well, it didn't prove it, but it was already proven. But it just shows it pretty well. What he did was he got some blue tack. Well, I don't know if it was blue tack. It might have been Play-Doh or clay or something. And he put it on his son's ears. He put it on the ridges around the ears, and he blindfolded him. And what he did was he clapped around him and asked his son to point to where the sound was coming from. Now, when it was left and right, it was pretty obvious the son pointed in the right direction. It was pretty instantaneous. He just went, oh, it's to my right and to my left. Which makes sense because it's hitting the right ear first and then the left ear, or it's hitting the left ear first and the right ear. You can't really influence that. But what happened when he moved up and down was crazy. The kid just couldn't tell. He had no idea where the sound was coming from. He would clap up high, the kid would point down low. Sometimes he got it, and I think it was just out of pure luck. But it was just crazy, because at one point, he literally had his hands between his son's legs, like down low next to the ground, by his feet really, and was clapping, just like quietly, just. And the son pointed in front of him about 50 feet and went, oh, it's way over there. So it's kind of crazy how calibrated our brains are based on the surfaces of our ears, that we can change it so massively by just putting a little bit of blue tack on it. You don't know where sounds are coming from. Now, I don't know how much it would affect you if you could still see at the same time, but if you're relying solely on your ears, slight changes make massive differences. So I kind of wonder how Evander Holyfield feels about getting his ear bitten off by Mike Tyson, but that's a story for another podcast. But anyway, that was off topic. We were talking about cochlear implants. I don't know if they deal with the direction of sound pretty well, but what they do is they bypass these hairs in the cochlea, in the inner ear. Sometimes over time, well, not sometimes, like nearly 100% of the time, humans, when they age, the inner hairs, or if you want to get technical, they're called stereocilia, get damaged. Literally, it's a physical thing where if you hear something too loud, the what's it called again? The eardrum gets hit with such force that it translates through to the hairs, and it literally bends the hairs out of shape and kills them. It damages them. You can see all these like close-ups of the actual hairs themselves on dangerousdecibels.org, and you can see damaged ones, and it's pretty graphic. They're like literally flat, and they're supposed to be straight up. But it happens when you get older. That's why it's the higher frequencies that go first. That's why there was that sound that came out on people's phones like 10 years ago where adults couldn't hear it. It was a really high pitched sound. I think it was like 20,000 hertz or something, 20 megahertz, which is like the upper range of human hearing. Humans can hear between 20 megahertz and 4 megahertz, I believe. I could be wrong. I'm not an audiologist. I'm just a biomedical engineer, so I should have some idea. But I think it's around that range. Don't quote me on it. Look for it yourself. You've got the internet in front of you. But anyway, back to what we were talking about. Stop getting distracted, Jack. Just talk about it. Fucking cochlear implants. What they do is they bypass these hairs. So a cochlear implant bypasses damaged or missing hair cells and sends an electrical message through an electrode directly to the auditory nerve. I got this information from the National Cochlear Implant Programme, which is run by Beaumont Hospital in Dublin, in Ireland. I don't think anyone outside of Ireland is going to listen to this podcast, so you should know where Dublin is. So cochlear implant bypasses these damaged hairs. This means that people born deaf, profoundly deaf, who have no hearing at all, have the ability to hear sound. That's provided that the auditory nerve still works. So we have pretty much sorted that out, you know. It works well for young children, below 5 years, and children above 7 years. This is because kids between 5 and 7 who are born, or that's if you're born deaf. Kids between 5 and 7 who are born deaf and have been unable to make good use of hearing aids are less likely to receive significant benefits from a cochlear implant. This is because the brain is still learning how to interpret sounds, and if you're still learning to interpret sounds and they totally change the way that you hear sounds, it can be really, really confusing, and the brain just fucks up. It just doesn't understand what's going on, and it can take longer to actually benefit from the use of a cochlear implant. So the best thing to do, really, if you ever have a child or know a child that is born deaf and you want to try a cochlear implant, do it before they're 5. Don't listen to me. I'm not a doctor. You're going to consult with some cochlear implant professionals who will tell you more than this. It obviously varies by a case-to-case basis, but in general, kids younger than 5 are ideal because they're still learning how to interpret sounds. So if you start them off with this cochlear implant, that's the way they'll hear sound, and that's the way that the brain will interpret it forever. Once they get to like 5 or 7, the brain doesn't really know what sound is, so it's kind of shut off a bit until you get older and you can understand what sounds are, and it can be explained to you, I imagine. But it's just crazy. Like, we have almost literally cured deafness, which is magic, you know. And it like it's literal magic. It's technology that cures an ailment that has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and nobody has known how we fix it or why it happens until now. Until 1929, when Ernie and Charlie were fucking around with a cat and decided to turn it into a telephone. And because of that, we have cured deafness. Let that sink in. People fucking around and we've cured deafness. Provided your auditory nerve still works. There's obviously people who have problems with that and they're still deaf. There's probably a way around that I don't know of, but I'm not going to look into it right now. I think we've talked enough today. But it's just crazy. It blows my mind. And it leads back to the neoteny I was talking about in the first episode of the podcast, which makes us curious. Our curiosity to fuck around and do things has led us to curing ailments that have been around for thousands of years. It's nuts. And it makes me wonder, what the fuck are people up to nowadays? If this was happening almost 100 years ago. That was 90 years ago. 90 years ago this happened. So what have they done since? I mean, they're probably not doing that kind of thing to animals. I mean, animal testing is still a thing, and it's a thing that... Am I going to talk about animal testing now? I probably should. Right. This is something that I came across in college, animal testing, and it kind of changed my perspective on it. I still don't know if I'm for or against it, but it's one of these things that is a necessary evil. There are a vast plethora of medical devices and pharmaceuticals that need to be tested. And if they're not tested on animals, they're going to be tested on humans, and humans will die. Because animals die when they're tested on them. It's cruel and unusual, and horrible things happen to animals when they're being tested on, but it is necessary. I don't know. I don't really I don't know if anyone can convince me otherwise. I know it's horrible. I know of cases where there is a shampoo test. And just as an example, there is a shampoo test where they hold down a rabbit, essentially in a vice, while it's alive, and they force its eye open. And what they do is they slowly drop shampoo onto the rabbit's eye until the eye dissolves. And from that, they gauge how safe it is for human use. That is a horrible, horrible thing to do to a living creature. It is awful. But the alternative to that is to do it to a human. And call me fucking selfish or elitist or whatever, but like, I'd much rather that happened to animals than it happens to humans. It's horrible, disgusting, and just terrible, but it does need to be done. We need to know these things. And because of that, we can move forward with knowledge that it does work, or not just shampoo, but it also happens for implants, like knee replacement surgeries, hip replacement surgeries, and all that. Now, this is usually done on healthy animals that don't need knee replacements or hip replacements or whatever. And it's also done with drugs and shampoos and vast cosmetic things. But it's awful and needs to be done. But from that, we learn. We learn that things are safe or they're not. And it's kind of crazy. It's kind of cruel. It's not kind of cruel. It is cruel. But it's the only way to do it. And that's my stance on it. Now, I don't blame anyone for not being on the side of it. It is awful. It's terrible. But it's necessary. And I'm going to stop talking about it right now. But still, it just blows my mind that people fucking around with a cat cured deafness. Not directly, but they led to techniques that were used on humans, clinical trials and all that. And now we have a cure for damaged hair cells in the ear. And we can just bypass them. Children can hear. Children can create music. People can listen to music. It's amazing. People can communicate effectively because of this. And it's all from fucking around with a cat. But that's enough for today, I think. I think I've rambled on a bit too much. I've gotten into a lot of topics that I wasn't supposed to get into, but you know, it's just one of those days. I've had a bit too much coffee, I think. So I'm still going, but I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to thank you all for listening, and hopefully I'll catch you next time, and bye-bye. Okay, that episode went on way too fucking long. Well, not too long, but I just got off topic a small bit, and also I'm starting to lose the ability to talk. I'm starting to stutter a little bit. Maybe I'm speaking a bit too quickly, and now I've consciously slowed down. But that was kind of a topic that I embrace more than previous episodes. It's kind of off the wall, crazy, and will not affect you in real life at all, unless you're deaf. And if you're listening to this and you're deaf, fucking great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. But it's kind of one of those weird things that nobody needs to know, but I like to know things that I don't need to know. Okay, preview for next episode. Next episode is going to be something that is very near and dear to my heart. Well, not near and dear to my heart. It's something that I was very interested in. It's a sniper in World War II, a Finnish guy named, I'm going to butcher his name, so if you're Finnish, I'm sorry, Simo Hea. And he has the most confirmed kills of any sniper in the world, or of any man in the world, I guess. It's fucking crazy. He fought in the Winter War when Russia invaded Finland, and Finland fucked him up. Finland lost in the end, but they fucked him up. It's going to be something interesting. It's going to be something that you don't need to know at all. So I think we're going to continue with this theme. Jesus, I'm starting to sound like Mike Tyson. Simo Hea. Alright, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.